I've talked about in my videos the importance of family, the importance of brotherhood, the importance of being close to your relatives with your parents, and of course I fully stand by that. But there's unfortunately situations where people that you're related to do things just like the very people that we try so hard to avoid, the toxic friends that we've come across, toxic relationships, toxic coworkers, whatever it might be. Which, of course, in this situation is different. Being related to them, it's not so easy to cut them off. And I want to start by sharing a story with you guys involving my little brother, who I'm very close with. We weren't super close growing up, but we talk pretty much every day now. And my aunt on my dad's side, and also the cousin on my dad's side, I mean, my aunt's daughter. So back in May of last year, my little brother was visiting New York City, and we're here in the Pacific Northwest, but visiting New York City for the celebration of my cousin's college graduation. And I wasn't able to make it at the time. I had other obligations to focus on. But my little brother and his girlfriend went there, and all was well, celebrated the graduation. He was actually staying at my cousin's apartment in New York City and cat sitting because my cousin and my aunt had gone on a vacation after the graduation just to celebrate. I think they'd either went to Japan or China. My brother was staying there with his girlfriend, touring New York City, his first time being there. And they had cat cameras in the apartment, which my brother was aware of. But one night, my little brother, he turns the cat cameras around because they were in the living room where he was sleeping. He was sleeping on a fold-out couch. And understandably, he wasn't comfortable being watched while he was sleeping, with his girlfriend next to him, as I don't think anyone in the right mind would be comfortable being watched on camera while they're sleeping. So he turned them around. And he gets woken up very early in the morning. I think the cameras, he explained to me that they had some kind of buzzer on them, like an alarm system. So he gets woken up very early in the morning by them. And it's my aunt and my cousin flipping out over the cameras. I think it's almost like the certain doorbells where you can talk to the person. I think that I imagine they would have called him. But cursing at him, saying that you need to get out of there, that you have 1 hour to pack your stuff and leave the apartment, or they're going to have the doorman come up and kick you out and call the police. So right off the bat, I wasn't aware of all this until later in the afternoon, until around, I think it was 1 p.m. Pacific time, when my brother had called me and told me the situation of what happened. So luckily, in quick due time, my brother was able to be resourceful and find another hotel for him and his girlfriend. But what I was so upset about was not even him getting kicked out, was not even whatever, he turned around the cameras, which even my little brother had acknowledged. Maybe he should have asked before turning the cameras around. Again, I still think it's weird to watch someone while they're sleeping. I still think that's creepy, quite frankly. But nonetheless, my brother admitted maybe he could have asked before turning the cameras around. But my issue was the principle of you kicking my little brother out in the street of a city he's never been to before, a city that's very densely populated with crime, like any other major city in the country, and telling him that he only has an hour to prepare himself. What if he wouldn't have been able to find a hotel? He would have been out in the middle of the street with his stuff, an easy target, a 20-something-year-old adult with a whole bunch of luggage, an easy target for crime. Again, luckily he was able to be resourceful and find a hotel. But that was my issue with the whole thing. So when my little brother had told me the news of what happened, quite frankly, I wanted nothing to do with my aunt. I was very close to saying not so kind things, which is good I didn't. Again, that would have been out of anger. That would have been being emotionally reactionary. So I just said the best thing I can do is just not associate with this person. And that's exactly what I did. My little brother was able to enjoy the rest of his trip with his girlfriend. But again, that relationship was tarnished. And what is so foolish is that this not only was our aunt, this was his godmother, the woman that had baptized him as a baby. And in the span of 5 minutes, she had managed to tarnish and quite frankly ruin a 30-year relationship. I mean, the amount of foolishness to me is just insane. How selfish, how just irrational some people can be, especially at an adult age, at an older age. So, when everything had gone down, word got out to the family, everyone knew the whole situation. They were all, very disgusted by it, quite frankly. But of course, everyone has to go on their business. You can't live in the past. You can't live these traumatic experiences over and over and over and over again, which is very stressful for my brother. But, I was to the point where I wasn't even angry anymore. If you guys have ever dealt with this perhaps with family, breaking up with a girlfriend, falling out with a friend, where there just comes a point where they might have done something very wrong, but you're not even angry. You're just kind of like, ugh, you're almost just indifferent, I guess is the right way to put it. And that's kind of how I was with this situation. But of course, it was still hard for there being division in the family. We'd actually just lost an uncle the year prior, which was horrible. And who I really felt bad for in all this was my grandmother on my dad's side. Because now she's seeing, after having just lost a son, her daughter and daughter-in-law and son now butting heads, along with her grandchildren. So my grandma had visited later that year. I think it was around November or December. And I was in the car with her, and that aunt had actually called my grandma. And I decided to talk to her, not because I wanted to talk to her, but because I was going to put my ego aside and do it for my grandmother. Again, for my 80-something-year-old grandmother who knows how much longer she's going to be on this earth. At least I could give her some form of peace and satisfaction, knowing that there was some form of coming together with the situation. So, we talked, and I explained to her why I was upset, why it was wrong, and she was still being very almost immature, saying that what she had told me was so ridiculous, that she had offered to pay for the hotel or half the hotel or something like that. Like, the money's going to make it okay. I explained to her, I don't even have an issue with you wanting him out, whatever, but if you would have said, hey, I don't feel comfortable with the cameras being moved. You have 24 to 48 hours to find a new hotel. I understand it's a big city. I don't want to overwhelm you too much. I don't want to ruin your trip. That would have been fine. Which is what I think she doesn't seem to understand. Even that cousin, the daughter of hers, was, from what I heard, cursing at my parents over text after this whole situation. So again, not knowing how to act, not having any respect for family or elders or anything like that. But again, I did it for the sake of my grandmother, to talk to this person. But again, going forward, this is not someone I'm really going to be able to take seriously again. These are not people who I'm going to be able to look at in the same way. Anyone who's been burned by a toxic person, whatever you want to call it, you know what I'm talking about. And it's a shame. The reason why I'm bringing up this story is because when I look around and just see so many broken families, so much butting heads, and these toxic traits that people talk about in society among relatives, among people who are related, it's shameful. I've even seen situations of butting heads over things like wills and stuff like that, which, with materialistic stuff, there's obviously sentimental value. That's more important than any amount of money. Like, even a year ago, I had lost my wallet. I was at a Safeway. And if you guys are familiar with the White Center, Washington area, it's not exactly the safest place. Not the first place you want to go to. Certainly not somewhere you'd want to be at night. But I had been in the self-checkout aisle, and I had forgotten my wallet. And within 2 minutes of being out of the store, I noticed that my wallet was missing. Right, I just paid with my card, so it would have had to be around the self-checkout scan. I had gone back in the store and noticed it was gone. Someone stole the wallet. I had, I think, something like $20 in there, and it was a nice wallet. But my point being is that I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't upset about losing the wallet. That was a wallet that my mother had actually gifted me for a birthday a few years ago. It wasn't about the money, how much money was in the wallet, whether it was a designer wallet or not. It was about the sentimental value of that wallet. And I think a lot of people are missing really the importance of these sentimental things and family. Like, when people talk about loneliness and stuff like that, I was even talking with someone who was saying how he feels like he doesn't really have a social circle and doesn't have many friends. But he also explained to me that he does have two siblings. I said, dude, you have all the company you need. If you can get close with your brothers, with your family, you shouldn't feel lonely. You shouldn't feel alone. And it's shameful that people feel this way. Like, I've talked about in previous videos, the single motherhood, the divorce rate and stuff like that, which again, the problem is much more than that. But a lot of boys right now not knowing their biological fathers growing up. And of course, there are some cases where they might have older brothers they can look up to, uncles, grandfathers if they're still alive. There are obviously cases where they still can have that kind of masculine leadership. But there are also cases where they don't. Even a friend of mine who I'd known in elementary school, this guy, he had abs back in elementary school. Everyone was thinking he'd be a pro soccer player. All the girls were obsessed with him leading up to the end of high school. But he came from a broken family. he didn't have a father in the home, and he came from a broken family. And I'd actually seen him a couple years after high school. I saw him at the gym, at the local gym, and he had fallen into really bad substance problems to the point where he could not even speak a coherent sentence. It was like a completely different person. This, optimistic guy who was full of energy had fallen. And, I see this a lot. I see a lot of this kind of stuff. And of course, not everyone who comes from a broken family is going to face that. But it's a shame thinking that what if this person would have had a more supportive network, a more supportive family? That's something that's missing amongst a lot of people nowadays. Even when I've harped on things in previous videos about family, divorce, stuff like that, when family can work, when marriage can work, when having a child can work, it is an amazing thing. I know someone who, basically family, I've known him since middle school, who he's, happily married and has a son who's on the way. And that's an awesome thing. I'm very happy to hear that. As mentioned, when it works, it is an amazing thing. But I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the cities either, because I've talked to people about this even in my last video, talking about kind of people socializing and making friends nowadays, where I've got a lot of comments talking about the cities and how in other parts of the country, of the state, it's not like that, which, I'm open to that. I talked to a fellow YouTuber who's actually in Alabama, named, if you guys haven't subscribed, named Casey Parks. That's Casey Parks, no spaces, Parks with an X. And he was telling me, he's like, dude, in Alabama, we have Southern hospitality. There's still respect and family values and that kind of stuff. And I see it really missing in the cities. And it's probably even more than just family, but just, it's almost like trendy to be scummy. That's what I see a lot now. Like, even I used to be a fan of MMA. I used to watch UFC a lot. And I, quite frankly, don't watch it anymore because it started falling into this trash talk and that kind of stuff. People just making all these crazy kind of insults, personal insults. And I'm like, it's not even about who's the best fighter. It's about who can say the most sleazy, disrespectful thing to sell tickets. And I see that falling into a lot of things, family, all different kinds of stuff. And even to touch on with my aunt's situation with broken families, my mother and my aunt still haven't talked. They still haven't talked. I know my mom's not angry about it. I know she's over it now. It's been almost a year, but they still haven't talked. And even my father, which that's his sister, understandably, they have talked, but he even told her, like, the relationship going forward is not going to be the same. When something like that happens, when these kind of traumatic things happen, it sucks. You can't control other people's behaviors. I'm not saying you should hold anger and that kind of stuff, but don't let it happen again. There are times where you have to distance yourself from those people. You can't give them another chance to do something like that. There's certain things that, forgive, but you can't just look over. And this is a prime example. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it wouldn't be okay if it happened to my little brother, which is even worse because family. But even if it was a stranger, that would be an unacceptable way to conduct yourself. It really would. And, I guess where I'm going with this video is it's just quite frankly heartbreaking to see just how much brokenness there is among family nowadays. And just how common it is from what I've seen growing up, from the people I've talked to, from, comments and stuff, of how many people have dealt with like narcissistic parents, people who just don't care about you, don't want to see you do well, right? Or there are cases where if that is the case, you have to distance yourself from those people, just like the toxic friends and people like that I've spoken about in previous videos. Because that's going to take a toll on you. That's going to take a toll on your well-being. That's going to take a toll on your mental health. That's going to, quite frankly, take a toll on your ability to even be successful if you're surrounding yourself with negativity. So, this is something I've seen, guys. But anyway, really appreciate you guys viewing the video, and I hope you guys have a good one. Thank you.